Welcome back to the Dershow. Normally, we're on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, and yesterday there was a glitch for which I apologize. Let me explain the circumstances. I was in court all day yesterday at the Trump trial. I sat in the front row, and I'll be talking about that today. Normally, the court ends at 4, but yesterday it ended at 5, and they wouldn't let us out, out of the court as long as Trump was talking to the media. So I was stuck, and I didn't get down to the car that was driving me up to a debate that I was having at 6:30 with Glenn Greenwald about whether the United States or Israel should bomb the Iranian nuclear reactor. So there I was, stuck in a car with 3 or 4 other people, and I tried to do the show by telephone, and it just didn't work. And so I know those of you who are my loyal viewers and listeners were trying your best to get access to it, and you heard some static and some mumbling and maybe a few words, but I will repeat essentially what I said yesterday in today's show. Before we get to that, there was one new development that I do want to talk about, and that is the International Criminal Court, which is a court the United States does not belong to, Israel does not belong to, and a number of other countries don't belong to, but is bound by a treaty, the Treaty of Rome, decided to request the issuance of warrants against Benjamin Netanyahu and the Secretary, the Minister of Defense of Israel, at the same time that it issues warrants against the heads of the Hamas, creating a false equivalence between a terrorist group with no judiciary and a democracy that is fighting for its self-defense. The problem with the International Criminal Court's claim of jurisdiction is that the treaty under which it's created has a concept called complementarity. It's a fancy word, but all it means is that the court is not a court of first action. It can only go after countries if they don't have a judiciary willing and capable of investigating their own alleged criminals. And of course, Israel has one of the best judiciaries in the world, very active judiciary. It's put several of its own prime ministers in under investigation. Rabin was investigated. Sharon was investigated, Olmert was investigated and imprisoned, Netanyahu is on trial, and the president of Israel, a former president of Israel, went to prison. In fact, it led to a joke, which I made up and circulated around Israel, but it became a popular joke. When you ask a former prime minister of Israel or a former president of Israel for his cell number, it's not necessarily his telephone. I visited Olmert in his cell in prison in the outskirts of Jerusalem, somewhere between Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. Israel is one of the best judiciaries in the world, and it's an arrogant violation of its own treaty, and it tries to place the International Court above the law to try Benjamin Netanyahu and others when Israel is perfectly capable of trying its own people. And so we'll be following this travesty of justice. But today I want to focus on another travesty of justice, the one occurring in a Manhattan courtroom that I was at yesterday. I wrote a piece about it. In today's New York Post, you can get it online. I wrote 2 pieces, actually, one for the Daily Mail, but they haven't published it yet. And so if you want to really read about what happened in the courtroom yesterday, don't read the New York Times. Don't listen to NBC or The Beast, because they had completely inaccurate renditions of some of the things that happened in the courtroom. But my rendition is completely accurate. I was actually not thrown out of the courtroom. Remember, the judge threw out all the media, but for some reason, I was sitting in the front row with some of Trump's lawyers, and I suspect they just didn't throw me out. And so I was there, had a front row seat to the judge going berserk and yelling and threatening the witness for the defense, Bob Costello. We'll talk about that right now, but you can read about it in the New York Post today. Okay, so I was there the whole 8 hours, and I think in the 8 hours I was there, I saw the judge make more mistakes of law in one day than I generally see in a trial of a month or 2 months. And some of them were really, really quite serious. Um, but before we get to the judge's mistakes, the star of the day, of course, continued to be Michael Cohen. He was cross-examined. And he just, it's amazing when you sit in a courtroom and you watch somebody lie to your face. Here was one of his lies. He swore under oath, that he would not have accepted a pardon from Donald Trump if Donald Trump had offered him a pardon. Of course, Donald Trump didn't offer him a pardon. And of course, he would have accepted it because, as he told his lawyer, he would do anything to avoid imprisonment, by which he meant he would lie, he would cheat, he would steal. He did all of the above in order to avoid imprisonment. And yet he wouldn't accept a pardon from the president of the United States. If you believe that, not far from the courthouse is the Brooklyn Bridge. And I would love to sell that to you, because you have to be extremely naive to believe that Michael Cohen would not accept a pardon. He also admitted that he stole $60,000 from Donald Trump, and he still owes it to him. I was hoping maybe for a Perry Mason moment where a policeman would walk into the courtroom and put him in handcuffs, because he admitted right on the stand they had committed a felony, grand larceny, right in the jurisdiction where the police have authority. But no, they just took it as well. That's Michael Cohen. He lies, he cheats, he steals. I watched the jury fairly closely when that testimony was given, and you could see the jury's eyes really opened, and they were saying, "What? He stole $60,000 from his boss? That's the way he treats his financial obligations as a fiduciary? Can we really trust what he said about what he told Donald Trump and what Donald Trump knew?" I mean, the basic line that you hear all the time is, "Would you buy a used car from him?" I wouldn't even take a used car from him if you offered it to me free, because it'd probably be full of problems. But if you wouldn't buy a used car from somebody, would you actually credit his testimony and convict the man running for president under the Republican Party ticket of a serious crime based on his testimony? I don't know. I don't know what the jury will think. But it was just lie after lie after lie, and they were so transparent. And here's the way the judge handled it. The defense attorney made a very good argument to the judge that he shouldn't allow the case to go to the jury, that there's insufficient evidence of the elements of the crime, and that the judge obviously knows that that Michael Cohen is a liar. And here's what the judge said: "Well, the jury is composed of 12 New Yorkers. New Yorkers are shrewd, and they can see through lies. And if he was really lying, they would see through it." No, they wouldn't, because the 12 jurors probably voted against Donald Trump and probably don't want to see Trump run for president. If not all of them, most of them, if you take the demographics seriously. Manhattan, I think 85% of the voters voted against Trump, and probably a very substantial portion of them would vote against him again and would not want him to be president, and would convict him if they thought it would prevent him from being president. So no, it's not an adequate protection to say the jury will reject the testimony. What if they don't reject the testimony? Will the judge then grant a motion for an acquittal? I don't think he will do that. But lie after lie after lie, and I just don't get how the prosecution could credibly put on a witness that they know is lying. He admitted a lot of his lies. He admitted the $60,000, but he told lies that he didn't admit. He told lies right to the jury, lies that anybody would be able to see through if they had an objective mind. And so, what will the jury believe? Will some of the jurors believe? Will others juries not believe? The prosecution is going to argue that you can convict without believing Michael Cohen because all of his testimony is corroborated. That is simply false. the key crucial phone call, an 82-second phone call to Donald Trump's bodyguard. The purpose of the call, as evidenced by emails and text, was to complain to Donald Trump's bodyguard that he, Michael Cohen, was being harassed by a 14-year-old boy, and could he get some Secret Service help on that? That kind of, and he gave him the number and he gave him the background. That would take at least 60 or 70 seconds to make that call. And then he claims that the bodyguard then handed the phone over to Donald Trump, and there was enough time for Michael Cohen to tell Donald Trump that he had made the payoff to Stormy Daniels. I know Donald Trump well enough to know he doesn't just listen; he talks. He talks all the time. I had lunch with him yesterday with the group of lawyers and others. We were all sitting around the same room having John's Pizza, which is pretty good. And he talked and talked and talked and talked. Anytime somebody else tried to talk, he talked as well. So the idea that 82-minute phone call about a 14-year-old boy harassing him also included the definitive, unequivocal statement that he told Trump that the payoff had been made. Even if he did that, which I don't believe he did, and I don't believe any rational person would believe he did, but even if he did, he didn't even testify that he told him that they then entered the payment not as reimbursement for the payment of the hush money to Stormy Daniels, or the NDA, non-disclosure agreement, but rather as legal expenses or retainer expenses. And that's all confused. We don't know, because we know that Michael Cohen thought he was cheated. He didn't get enough money, even if he stole the $60,000, and he didn't get a bonus. And so this very well may have been a bonus. We just don't know. And the idea that you can prove beyond a reasonable doubt that when it was entered as legal expenses or a retainer, it wasn't entered by Donald Trump, it was entered by some low-ranking secretary or administrator, that the intent was to defraud. Defraud who? Defraud the voters of New York, I guess is what they're saying, because the voters of New York would never vote for somebody. They didn't vote for him anyway, but would never vote for anybody who had sex with or paid money to have a non-disclosure agreement with a porn star. No. And then you have to prove, in order to get the case from being a misdemeanor that's barred by the statute of limitations, you have to prove that his intention in having somebody else enter it improperly, his intention was not to prevent his wife from learning about his sexual encounter. It wasn't to prevent him being fired from television, because the television contract has a morality clause. And if you sleep with a prostitute, that violates the morality clause. That it wasn't designed to protect his brand, Trump towers, Trump buildings all over the world. It was solely intended to help him win the election, even though he wouldn't have had to disclose the payment until after the election. It's such an absurd, stupid case, but who knows what the jury will find. And then the judge tried to deny the defendant the right to put on a defense. First, he said, even though there are letters and testimony by Cohen that says that the payment was an illegal campaign contribution, which it clearly was not, but the prosecution put in evidence that it was an illegal campaign contribution, and yet the judge denied the defendant the right to put on the country's leading expert on campaign contributions to testify that it wasn't even close. It's not a campaign contribution. It's a personal contribution, not a campaign contribution. And the judge refused to allow him to put the expert on to say that. Oh, we could put the expert on to just say, I'm an expert, but you couldn't testify as to the substance and contradict what was put on the other side. So that denies Trump the right to put on a defense, but this is even worse. So you get Robert Costello, a very distinguished lawyer, the former deputy head of the criminal division of the Justice Department, U.S. Attorney's Office in the Southern District of New York, one of the most dignified and distinguished offices in the country. And he's testifying. And right one after the other, the judge is making erroneous rulings. And every time the judge made one of these erroneous rulings, I would shake my head. I would go, my God. Or I would raise my eyebrows, or I would stare at the judge. I'm entitled to do that. I'm an observer. But the witness did the same thing when the judge made ruling after ruling against allowing him to fulfill his oath to testify to the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Apparently, I didn't see it, even though I was sitting right there. Apparently, Costello rolled his eyes, and the judge got furious and cleared the courtroom, made every single journalist get out of the courtroom, and every single person get out of the courtroom except me and 3 or 4 other people who were sitting in the front row. Why, I don't know, but what? I wasn't going to just leave on my own. Nobody asked me to leave, so I stayed. And I saw him, and the judge went berserk when nobody was in the courtroom. He didn't have to be nice to present himself as a benevolent despot to the jury and to the media. He went nuts, and he, really yelled at this distinguished lawyer. And he said to him, "What you did was contemptuous." It reminds me of Mae West in Little Chickadee, I think, where the judge says to her, "You're showing contempt for this court." And she says, "No, Your Honor, I'm trying my best to hide my contempt for this court." Well, I'm sure that's what he was doing. He was hiding his contempt for the court. But everybody's entitled to roll their eyes. This is not Taxi, where a psychotic says, "You looking at me? You looking at me?" That's you're allowed to look at somebody. You're allowed to roll your eyes, as I did and as other people did. But the judge then went further than I've ever seen a judge go. Look, I have been in courtrooms all over the world. I've been in courtrooms in Russia. I've been in courtrooms in China. I've been in courtrooms in Ukraine. I've been in courtrooms in England. I've been in courtrooms in France. I've been in courtrooms in Italy. I've been in courtrooms all over the world. I've been to, I think, courtrooms in 40 of the 50 states in the United States or thereabouts. I've never seen a judge threaten to strike a defense witness's entire testimony because he rolled his eyes. Let's assume he did something wrong. He didn't do anything wrong. Let's assume he did something wrong. So you punish him, but you don't punish the defendant. How dare a judge suggest that he could deny Donald Trump his right to a defense because the judge didn't like the way a witness looked at him? If you don't like the way a witness looks at you, look away. You're supposed to have a thick skin, Your Honor. This is not your courtroom. This is the courtroom of every citizen of New York and of every citizen of the United States. Grow up, judge. Get a thick skin. But don't strike or threaten to strike the testimony of a major defense witness. If he did that, that would be the easiest appeal I had ever argued. The idea that a judge can deny a defendant his Sixth Amendment right to confront witnesses, that's what this guy was doing. He was confronting Cohen. He had been Cohen's lawyer, and he was giving testimony that contradicted his testimony, Cohen's testimony. The idea of striking that is absurd. It's if a lawyer ever suggested that lawyer would be disciplined. That lawyer would be sanctioned. What the judge did was just unacceptable. It was unethical. It was immoral. It was illegal. It was unconstitutional. And he gets away. And CNN praised him. CNN headline after headline about how the judge rebuked the defend the witness and how the witness can upset the judge. Nobody went after the judge for doing what no judge is allowed to do, that is striking the testimony of an important defense witness because he doesn't like the way he looked at him. And so, there are so many reversible errors in this case. In one day, I saw more errors than I've seen in trials that took 6 months. In one day, I just kept counting. My God, how could the judge be doing this? What's the reason? I don't know. Is it because his daughter is making money off this trial? That's what Trump alleges. I don't know whether that's true or not. His daughter does work for a fundraising company, which fundraises for people, including one person who helped prepare Michael Cohen for his testimony, a congressman from New York. But whatever the reason is, this judge has such a strong bias. Now, you wouldn't know it if you were not in the courtroom when the judge excluded everybody. I was there. I could see the bias. I was sitting just feet away from the judge. I could see how angry he was at a defense attorney, at a defendant, a witness, a defense witness, and a defense attorney who was on Trump's side. And you can see the way he treats Trump's lawyers as distinguished from how he treats the lawyers for the prosecution. The lawyers are quite good in this case. The prosecution lawyers are quite good. The defense lawyers are quite good. It's just the judge who isn't very good. And yet, of course, CNN, the New York Times, MSNBC praise the judge all the time because he's on their side. Because CNN and MSNBC and the New York Times have a narrative, and they're rooting for an outcome. They're rooting for the conviction. I am rooting against the conviction. Yes, I am rooting against the conviction. There is no basis for a conviction in this case, and that's why we have this new motto: if the charge is not legit, you must acquit. Remember that? If it doesn't fit, you must acquit. But in this case, the charges are simply not legit. And if the charges are not legit, a jury must acquit. And if the jury doesn't acquit, then the judge must acquit. And if the judge doesn't acquit, then the Court of Appeals or the appellate courts have to acquit. But there's no way there should be a conviction in this case based on the illegitimacy of the charges in this case. The case is now over. I still can't figure out what the crime is. I cannot figure out how you can convert an expired misdemeanor into a viable felony based on the lack of evidence of what the defendant Trump intended when some functionary submitted a report indicating that the payment was for legal expenses or retainer expenses when it was actually to reimburse for a non-disclosure agreement. It's not as if, and Trump has said this and he's right, it's not as if he said this was for construction costs. I had a case like that when I represented Leona Helmsley. She had bought very expensive stereo system, and she listed it on her tax returns as, and crossed it out. You can see it's all whited out, and listed it in the tax returns as a security system, and argued that the security system, since it protected her papers and records, was tax deductible. And that became one of the bases for the charge. But there's a big difference between listing something as a security system when it's a stereo system, when it just plays records and tapes, and listing a payment designed to prevent a lawsuit from going forward as a legal expense. It is a legal expense. All right. You could argue he should have been clearer and he should have disclosed it was hush money paid to a prostitute. Nobody in history has ever paid hush money to anybody and then listed it on a corporate form. But okay, you could argue that. But how do you get around the statute of limitations? You have to then say that when his secretary listed it that way, somehow Donald Trump had in mind that it would be a campaign contribution that he had to hide, even though he had no obligation to report campaign contributions until months after he was sworn in the White House. It just makes no sense whatsoever. But that's this case. And so if it ain't legit, you must acquit. Let's see what happens. Okay, let's go to some letters. It's unbelievable what a corrupt judge and prosecutors can do to an innocent man. Hope they get their just dues. No, they're not going to get their just dues, but I hope there's an acquittal in this case. Again, I didn't go to court yesterday to show political support for Donald Trump. I very deliberately did not go out with the politicians and speak during the lunch hour because that would be perceived as political support. I was not there to give political support to the Republican candidate for president. I was there to give legal support, more realistically, legal opposition to this fake case against him. And I will do it again and again and again because I want him to be acquitted. I want the prosecution to fail in this case. And that would be good, not only for him, but for democracy and for all of us to make sure that this never happens again to any American, what's happening in that courtroom. Okay. Okay. Somebody doesn't like that. I said, my specialty is taking guilty defendants and getting them a not guilty verdict. Actual quote, truth is irrelevant. When you're a defense attorney, you try your best to get an acquittal. You don't distort the evidence. You don't do anything unethical. You cross-examine the witnesses. You argue that the state's case is not sufficient, and you do it whether the defendant is guilty or innocent. And even if the defendant tells you he's innocent, which very rarely, or guilty, tells you he's guilty, which very rarely happens, you still have to fight for him because he's what he told you is in confidence, and you can't use that against him. So I will continue to defend guilty people. And, as I've said before, the vast majority of my clients have been guilty. Thank God for that. Would anybody want to live in a country where the majority of people charged with crime are innocent? No. You want to live in a country where the majority of people charged are guilty. And to keep it that way, you have to have zealous defense attorneys like me, leaving no stone unturned and fighting every battle to try to win an acquittal. If not an acquittal, a hung jury. If not a hung jury, a lower sentence. That's our job. We are advocates. We are not judges. And so the truth matters to us as individuals, but as lawyers, defense lawyers, it doesn't matter. You can't tell a lie, but you have no obligation to encourage or help the prosecution produce evidence, even if that evidence is truthful. That's the job of the defense attorney. If you don't like it, move to Iran. There's no problem. No defense attorney is entitled to defend anybody. They've executed a bunch of people over this weekend for terrible crimes like dressing improperly or being a dissident. That's Iran. You might make the same statements about China or about Russia or about Iraq, but you can't make it about the United States. In the United States, we defend people whether they're guilty or innocent, whether or not a guilty verdict reflects the truth or a not guilty verdict protects the truth. It's like the job of a priest. If somebody tells a priest that he murdered his wife, the priest goes to his grave without disclosing that. Is that the truth? No, a priest doesn't lie, but he doesn't allow the truth to come out because his job is to protect confidences. That's the same job that I have as a defense lawyer. This is an interesting one. But who are these records that are claimed to be false actually submitted to? That's a good question. They really aren't submitted to anybody. They just lay there. Did they go to the IRS? No, he didn't take them as a tax deduction, as far as the evidence shows, as far as I know. Or were the shareholders defrauded? What the government, what the state claims, the prosecution now claims, finally, we hear what the crime is. Defrauded the citizens of New York by denying them the information that he paid hush money. Everybody knew it. It's been in the papers. And yet he's being charged with defrauding the citizens of New York. What an absurd charge that anybody would be defrauded thinking that Donald Trump was a choir boy. No, we all know. Already the tape had come out, the Hollywood tape had come out in which he talked about how he, grabs the genitals of people and people will let him do anything they want. So there's no way he could have been defrauding the people of New York. How can prosecutors say Trump is covering up a crime, but he was never charged for that crime? Not only wasn't he charged for that crime, but federal prosecutors said there was no case. Federal election officials said there was no case. Even the original DA in New York said there was no case. But finally, after Bragg said there was no case, he decided that he wanted to run for re-election and he wanted to get Trump. And, that's why I named my book, Get Trump, because both Bragg and the Attorney General of New York had as their political goal, their electoral goal, to get Trump. And if they fail to get Trump, they won't get reelected. Well, I hope they don't get Trump, and I hope they don't get reelected. All right, again, sorry for yesterday's glitch. I'll make up for it, try my best not to have any more glitches, but hey, that's technology, and that's what happens when you overcommit yourself, as I did, going to court, doing this show, and then having a debate after. So I got home, I was pretty tired, but I recovered. I'm doing fine today. So see you tomorrow, hopefully strong and ready to kick some rear end. See ya.